Get that man out of here right now. The bride's piercing scream echoed through the gold-covered wedding hall in Lagos, forcing the violins to stop mid-song. Slap. A security guard shoved the old beggar so hard that he crashed onto the cold marble floor. The small bouquet in his trembling hands fell into a puddle of rainwater. Its petals were crushed beneath the polished shoes of wealthy guests laughing in mockery. What a filthy beggar who doesn't know his place. He actually dared to ruin a wedding day. But then, the old man slowly lifted his head. His tear-filled eyes didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at the guards. They looked only at the bride. Like a father, looking at the daughter he loved more than his own life. And in that very moment, no one knew that the man the entire wedding hall treated like garbage had once spent 15 years in prison to save the very woman standing before him in that luxurious wedding dress. Tonight, from the glamorous city of Lagos, Nigeria, a secret buried for many years, is about to leave the entire wedding hall in stunned silence. Because sometimes, the poorest person in the room is the one who sacrificed the most. And the person wearing the finest clothes is often the most ungrateful of all. If your parents are still alive, listen to this story until the very end. And don't forget to subscribe, because tonight's story may leave you in tears before it's over. There are some fathers who never expect their children to remember everything they sacrificed. They do not ask to be repaid. The only thing they ever hope for is that their child can live in peace, grow up safely, and walk through life without suffering the same pain they once endured. Even if the one forced to silently carry all the consequences is themselves. 15 years ago, Vanessa Cole had never known anything about million-dollar diamond wedding gowns. She never imagined there would come a day when she would walk into the most luxurious hotels in Lagos, places with ceilings covered in golden crystal chandeliers, where people casually sipped champagne more expensive than what a poor family could survive on for months. Back then, Vanessa was just a skinny black girl living in Makoko, the most infamous slum in Lagos. There were no glamorous lights there, no luxury cars, no beautiful dresses, only the heavy smell of dirty water rising every evening, the sound of ship horns echoing through the night, and rotten wooden houses balancing dangerously above dark polluted water. Whenever heavy rain came, the entire slum looked as if it would sink beneath the flood. Barefoot children ran through the mud. Adults stayed awake all night throwing water out of their homes. Some families were so poor that even a proper meal was considered a luxury. Vanessa grew up in a place like that. Her childhood never had expensive toys, no lavish birthday parties, no new clothes during holidays. But she never lacked love, because her father, Elijah Cole, spent his entire life shielding his daughter from the cruelty of the world. During the day, he worked unloading cargo at the Lagos port. The crates were so heavy that his shoulders became permanently hardened and bent over the years. At night, he repaired fishing nets for local fishermen. Some nights, when the cold was unbearable, Elijah still stood waist-deep in freezing water for hours, his hands turning purple, just to earn enough money to buy medicine when Vanessa got sick. His life had never been easy. His back slowly curved with age. His hands were covered in cracks and calluses. Even his hair turned gray far earlier than it should have. But strangely, every time Vanessa asked, "Dad, are you tired?" he always smiled. A gentle smile so heartbreaking it hurt to see. "As long as you can go to school, I'm not tired." He said it so softly, as if sacrificing everything for his daughter was simply natural. One night, Vanessa woke up because she heard a quiet cough. She saw her father sitting beside the tiny window. Inside the cramped room, lit only by a weak yellow bulb, Elijah silently drank water instead of eating. He swallowed each sip slowly, as though it could somehow make the hunger disappear, because the last bit of food in the house had been saved for his daughter. At the time, Vanessa was still too young to understand, too young to know how much a father could sacrifice for his child. She only knew that every morning she woke up, her father was still there, like a wall that could never collapse, like a safe place she believed would exist forever. Until that fateful night, a violent storm swallowed Lagos in chaos. The sky turned pitch black. Thunder split across the flooded streets. Vanessa had just turned 16. She had entered her rebellious years. At school, she became friends with wealthy classmates. Girls dressed in designer clothes, Rich boys driven around in luxury cars. The more she spent time with them, the more ashamed she became of her own life. She hated Makoko, hated the smell of sewage, hated the tiny, miserable room where she and her father lived. She hated her old clothes, hated watching her father come home every day with grease and dirt covering his hands. And deep inside, the thing she hated most was poverty itself. That night, Vanessa secretly stole the car keys of one of her rich friends. She only wanted to feel it once, what it was like to live like the elite, to drive a luxury car, to finally feel special. Music blasted loudly inside the car. Neon lights reflected across the eager face of a 16-year-old girl who still knew nothing about how terrifying life could become. She laughed, the innocent laugh of youth before reality destroys it. Then, everything changed within seconds. Screech. The sound of tires tore through the rain. A man's body was violently thrown onto the road. Vanessa Frozzi. Blood slowly spread beneath the blurry yellow streetlights. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her phone slipped onto the floor of the car. No, please. She stepped out of the vehicle. Her legs felt too weak to hold her up. The man lay motionless in the middle of the street, not moving anymore. Thunder roared once again across the dark Lagos sky. Vanessa broke down crying. She knew her life was over. Half an hour later, Elijah arrived at the scene. He saw his daughter curled up by the roadside, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Her clothes were soaked, her face pale like a child who had just lost the entire world. "Dad, I didn't mean to. I don't want to go to prison." That was the only sentence Vanessa could still manage to say. Elijah did not answer immediately. He simply stood there in the rain. Water streamed down his exhausted, aging face. That father understood one thing clearly. If Vanessa got arrested, everything would end. A poor girl involved in a fatal accident in Lagos would never get another chance in life. No one would let her start over. No one would pity a poor child. Elijah stared at his daughter for a very long time. He saw the fear in her eyes, the despair, the future of his child collapsing right in front of him. And then, he made a decision that would change both of their destinies forever. Elijah stepped toward the police officers. His voice was rough and broken. "I was driving the car." Vanessa lifted her head instantly. Her eyes widened in horror. "Dad." She shook her head violently. But Elijah only turned back to look at his daughter one last time. His eyes were painfully calm. No anger, no fear. Only the love of a father willing to sacrifice everything. "You have to keep living." Those were the last words he said, before the handcuffs were placed around his wrists. That night, Vanessa stood frozen beneath the rain, watching the police car slowly disappear into the darkness. She had no idea that it would be the last time she would ever truly live as Elijah Cole's daughter. In the months that followed, everything changed too quickly. A wealthy family connected to the victim secretly helped Vanessa change her identity. They took her away from Makoko, sent her to elite private schools. From Vanessa Cawley, she became Vanessa Blake. A new identity, a new life. And from that moment on, Vanessa slowly learned how to bury the past. She practiced speaking like the upper class, learned how to use silverware at elegant dinner tables, learned how to walk like wealthy women at luxurious parties. She learned how to smile perfectly, how to hide where she came from, how to pretend she had never belonged to the poorest slum in Lagos. And the name Elijah Cole slowly became something that embarrassed her. At first, Vanessa still planned to visit her father, but as the years passed, every time she saw his prison uniform, she became afraid. Afraid people would discover her past, afraid they would learn she was the daughter of a poor prisoner. And eventually, she chose silence. She never returned to the prison, never wrote a letter, never asked about him, not even once, as if that father had never existed in her life. But throughout all 15 years, Elijah never blamed his daughter, not even once. After leaving prison, he wandered across Lagos alone, taking any work he could find just to survive. Sometimes sleeping beneath bridges, sometimes collecting scrap metal near the docks, sometimes begging for leftover food behind luxury restaurants. But every year, he secretly watched Vanessa from afar. The day she graduated from university, Elijah stood outside the school gates for hours, just to see his daughter smile in her graduation gown. The day Vanessa appeared on the cover of a Lagos business magazine, he bought a copy using an entire week's worth of food money. then sat beneath a streetlight for hours, using his trembling fingers to touch his daughter's face in the photograph. His eyes filled with pride. Even though she never remembered him, even though the world saw him as a failure, inside Elijah's heart, Vanessa was still the little girl who once wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "When I grow up, I'll buy you a beautiful house, Dad." But now, that little girl was about to marry a billionaire. Inside the most luxurious wedding hall in Lagos, and that poor father, after losing everything for 15 years, had only one final wish: to see his daughter wearing a wedding dress just once in his lifetime. There are wounds that never bleed, that leave no scars upon the skin. But sometimes, just one sentence, one look, or one cold moment from the person you love most is enough to shatter a human heart forever. That night, the heavy rain continued pouring over the glamorous city of Lagos. White lightning ripped across the dark sky. Rain hammered endlessly against the glass windows of the Royal Imperial Hotel, where the most luxurious wedding of Nigeria's elite was taking place. Inside the grand ballroom, golden crystal chandeliers illuminated every corner. Long rows of imported white flowers lined the aisles. Soft violin music floated gently beneath elegant conversations and laughter. Champagne sparkled inside expensive crystal glasses. The most powerful businessmen in Lagos raised their drinks while chatting. Famous politicians arrived alongside their families, dressed in designer clothing. Everything was perfect, the kind of wedding millions of women dream about. And at the center of it all stood Vanessa Blake. She stood beneath the lights like a queen. Her diamond-covered white wedding gown hugged her slender figure perfectly. Her hair was styled with flawless elegance. The gemstone necklace around her neck reflected shimmering light across her flawless brown skin. Everyone looked at her with admiration. No one could have imagined that the woman standing in the center of that luxurious wedding hall had once grown up in the poorest slum in Lagos. No one knew that behind her perfect appearance was a past Vanessa had spent 15 years trying to bury, until the massive ballroom doors slowly opened. A cold gust of wind carrying rain swept inside, and then an old beggar appeared at the entrance. The entire ballroom instantly fell silent. The violin music slowed. Many guests frowned in irritation at the sight of such a misplaced figure. The old man wore faded, worn-out clothes. His torn shoes were soaked with rain. Wet gray hair clung to his thin, wrinkled face. In his hands was a small bouquet wrapped in old paper. Not luxurious, not beautiful, but held carefully as though it were the most precious thing he owned. The moment Vanessa saw him, her entire body froze. The champagne glass in her hand trembled slightly. All color disappeared from her face in an instant. A cold wave of panic crawled down her spine. "Security!" Her voice cut through the ballroom so sharply that several guests jumped. "Get him out of here immediately." 2 security guards rushed toward him at once. They did not ask questions. They did not give the old man a chance to explain himself. One guard grabbed Elijah violently by the arm. "You can't come in here." The other shoved him backward. "Get out now." Bum! Elijah's frail, aging body slammed onto the cold marble floor, right in front of the ballroom entrance. The sound echoed heavily through the luxurious hall. The small bouquet slipped from his hands into a puddle of rainwater. Its fragile white petals were crushed beneath the shoes of the guests. Someone laughed. Then more laughter followed. What a pathetic beggar. He probably came to beg for wedding money. Poor people always ruin everything. Several guests even pulled out their phones to record videos. They laughed, commented, watched with amusement as though it were some cheap comedy show. None of them knew that the man lying at their feet had once sacrificed his entire life for his daughter. Elijah slowly pushed himself back up. Every movement was painfully slow. Perhaps because of old age, or perhaps because his body had already been destroyed after years of wandering the streets of Lagos. His thin hands trembled from the cold. His worn-out clothes were soaked with filthy rainwater. Drops of rain slid from his gray hair down his exhausted face. But his eyes never looked at the people mocking him. He looked only at Vanessa. Only at the young woman in the white wedding dress standing beneath the dazzling lights. And in that moment, Elijah no longer saw the grown woman before him. He remembered only the little girl from years ago, the barefoot child who used to run through the slums of Makoko, the little girl who laughed joyfully whenever her father carried her on his shoulders. And now, that little girl looked like a princess from the dream he had carried in his heart his entire life. Elijah smiled softly, a heartbreaking smile filled with sorrow. I only wanted to see you once. His voice was rough and weak, so quiet it was almost swallowed by the storm outside. But Vanessa still heard him, and the moment those words reached her ears, her face turned pale instantly. Shut up, Vanessa nearly screamed. She rushed toward Elijah, her hands shaking violently. But it was not emotion, not sadness. It was fear, a terrifying fear tightening around her throat. Because Vanessa understood perfectly well, if the people inside that ballroom discovered the truth, everything she had built for 15 years would collapse completely. She would no longer be Vanessa Blake, the elegant businesswoman admired by Lagos high society. No longer the woman featured on financial magazine covers. No longer the symbol of success everyone envied. She would become Vanessa Cole once again, the daughter of a poor prisoner from the Makoko slums. And that was the thing Vanessa feared more than anything else in the world. Panic flooded her eyes. Are you insane? Who told you to come here? Elijah silently looked at his daughter. There was no anger in his eyes. No blame, only sadness. The quiet heartbreak of a father realizing the child he once held in his arms had changed too much. And in that moment, Elijah understood that the little girl who once hugged his neck might truly be gone forever. Vanessa clenched her teeth tightly. Her nails dug into her palms. Then she said the words that shattered Elijah's entire world. You are not my father. The ballroom suddenly fell into terrifying silence. The violin music stopped completely. Even the laughing guests froze for a few seconds. Elijah stood beneath the cold rain, motionless, as though someone had crushed his heart inside his chest. Rain streamed down his aging face. But the thing that hurt him most was not the cold storm, not the mocking laughter, not the humiliation before hundreds of people. It was the fact that the daughter he loved more than his own life was looking at him like a stain she desperately wanted erased from her world. From across the ballroom, Adrian Blake, Vanessa's groom, had been silently watching everything. At first, he also believed Elijah was just a homeless old beggar, a man who had wandered into the wrong place among the elite. But the longer Adrian watched, the more something felt terribly wrong. The old man's eyes did not look like the eyes of someone begging for money. There was no greed, no desperation, only pain. Pain that felt too real, too deep, too hopeless. So overwhelming that Adrian suddenly struggled to breathe without understanding why. Meanwhile, Vanessa was losing control more and more. Get him out of here now. I don't want to see him again. Her voice nearly cracked from panic. The guards immediately dragged Elijah toward the doors. But at that exact moment, the small bouquet slipped from his hands again. An old photograph slid out from the rain-soaked wrapping paper. The picture drifted gently onto the marble floor, right at Adrian's feet. He bent down and picked it up instinctively, and then his entire body froze. In the faded photograph was a smiling little black girl around 8 years old, wrapped joyfully in the arms of a younger man. Although time had changed the man's face greatly, Adrian recognized him instantly. It was Elijah, and the little girl was unmistakably Vanessa. On the back of the photograph, written in shaky, faded handwriting, were the words, "Even if the whole world turns its back on you, your father will always stand behind his daughter." Adrian's heart pounded violently. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward Vanessa, and for the first time since falling in love with her, he no longer saw elegance or gentleness in her face. Instead, he saw fear. The desperate fear of someone trying to bury the truth about who they really were. Vanessa lunged forward to snatch the photograph back, but it was already too late. Adrian tightened his grip around the picture. Then he turned to look at Elijah once again. The old man still stood quietly in the rain, alone, forgotten, like a father who had been erased from his own daughter's life. And in that moment, Adrian finally began to realize that behind this perfect wedding hid a secret far more painful than anything he had ever imagined. There are some secrets that never need to be spoken aloud. No confession is necessary. No screaming. No tears. Sometimes, just one old photograph accidentally falling onto a cold marble floor is enough to turn a person's entire life upside down within seconds. As Elijah was being dragged away from the main entrance by 2 security guards, The storm outside grew even more violent. Cold winds slammed against the massive glass windows of the Royal Imperial Hotel. Rain splashed across the polished marble floors, leaving long streaks that looked like tears. Inside the ballroom, the chaos had not fully settled. Some guests continued laughing under their breath. Others adjusted their expensive suits in annoyance, as if they had just witnessed an unpleasant interruption during their perfect night. The violin music had started playing again, but it no longer sounded soft and elegant. Even the musicians were losing focus. Vanessa still stood in the center of the ballroom wearing her stunning white wedding gown. She was still beautiful, still elegant, still looked like the perfect woman all of Lagos admired. But only she knew. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Her nails dug painfully into her palms. Vanessa tried to calm herself. It was over now. As long as he disappeared, the past would stay buried. No one would know. No one would remember. No one could drag her back into the life she had spent 15 years trying to escape. She had sacrificed too many years to build this life. A clean life. A luxurious life. A perfect life. And she could not allow one poor old man to destroy everything. But Vanessa had no idea that the moment Elijah was dragged away, an old worn wallet had accidentally slipped from the pocket of his torn coat. It lay quietly on the cold marble floor, old, soaked with rain, small enough that no one bothered looking down. No one cared. Except Adrian Blake. The young groom still stood silently near the entrance. From the very beginning, his eyes had remained fixed on Elijah. For some reason, a strange feeling had started growing inside him. That man did not look like someone trying to ruin a wedding. He did not look like a beggar. He did not look like a scam artist seeking attention. His eyes held no greed, no desperation, only pain. The silent pain of someone who had already lost everything, yet was still trying to protect the last shred of dignity he had left. Adrian slowly bent down. He picked up the wallet. The leather was almost completely peeled apart. The corners were badly worn. It smelled of rain, mold, and time. The kind of wallet most people inside that ballroom would never willingly touch. Adrian opened it. There was almost no money inside, only a few crumpled old papers, a faded bus ticket, and a small photograph carefully wrapped inside a thin layer of plastic. Clearly, it was Elijah's most precious possession. Adrian gently pulled the photo out, and the instant he saw it, his heart nearly stopped. It was an old photograph yellowed by time. In the picture, a little black girl around 8 years old was smiling brightly. Her eyes sparkled with joy. Her hair was tied neatly with a cheap ribbon. Her dress was old, but carefully washed and ironed. The little girl sat happily inside the arms of a younger man. The man was thin, his skin darkened from years of hard labor under the sun. His shirt was faded, his hands rough and calloused. But his smile was unbelievably warm. The way he looked at the little girl, as if she were the most precious thing in his entire life. Even though time had covered his face with gray hair and countless wrinkles, Adrian recognized him instantly. The man in the photograph was Elijah, and the little girl was none other than Vanessa. Not the elegant Vanessa Blake of today, but Vanessa Cole from many years ago, a poor child smiling happily in her father's arms. Adrian suddenly felt his throat go dry. Slowly, he turned the photograph over. A handwritten message appeared. The handwriting trembled. The ink had faded with time. Even if the whole world abandons you, your father will always protect you. Adrian stood frozen. The violin music, the conversations, the sound of crystal glasses clinking together. Every noise inside the ballroom suddenly felt distant, as if coming from another world. He looked up at Vanessa. She was trying to continue talking with a few older guests, as though nothing had happened. But the moment her eyes landed on the photograph in Adrian's hand, her entire body froze. The smile vanished from her face. Adrian, her voice dropped instantly. Where did you get that? Adrian did not answer. He continued searching through the wallet. Hidden in the deepest pocket was an old document nearly falling apart with age. He carefully pulled it out. It was a prison record. Prisoner's name, Elijah Cole. Charge, vehicular manslaughter. Adrian slowly read every line. Then his entire body went cold. The date of the crime matched perfectly with the same period Vanessa once told him her parents had died in an accident. Adrian remembered that night clearly. The two of them had been sitting inside a luxurious seaside restaurant in Lagos. Vanessa wore an elegant black dress. Candlelight reflected softly across her beautiful face. When she mentioned her parents, she lowered her head and wiped away tears. I lost them when I was very young. Her voice trembled, so I had to learn how to become strong. At the time, Adrian had felt heartbroken for her. He believed Vanessa was a tragic but resilient woman. He had held her hand tightly and whispered, "You'll never have to be alone again." But now, everything before him was changing completely. Her father was not dead. He had just stood outside moments ago, soaked in the rain, rejected by his own daughter like a complete stranger. Adrian unfolded the final paper inside the wallet. It was a letter that had never been sent. The handwriting shook so badly that some parts were almost unreadable. "Vanessa, I heard you graduated. I'm so proud of you. I don't need you to visit me. As long as I know you're living well, that's enough to make me happy." Adrian felt his throat tighten painfully. He turned toward the entrance. Outside, Elijah still stood quietly beneath the distant awning. He had not left. The old man simply held the crushed bouquet in his hands, watching the ballroom one final time. Like a father, asking for permission to see his daughter on the most important day of her life. No anger, no bitterness, no desire to ruin anything. Just once. One chance to see his daughter happy. Adrian tightened his grip around the letter. A cold feeling slowly spread through his chest. Not because of the rain, but because of the truth. The man humiliated outside was not someone trying to ruin the wedding. He was the man who had sacrificed his youth, freedom, and honor so Vanessa could have the future she enjoys today. And the woman standing beside Adrian in that pure white wedding dress may have built her entire new life on the silent sacrifice of her own father. Vanessa hurried toward him. "Give it to me." Her voice lowered, no longer soft, no longer graceful. Only panic remained. Adrian looked up at her. "Who is he?" Vanessa swallowed hard. Her lips trembled. "He's nobody." Adrian lifted the photograph in front of her. "Then why are you in his arms?" Vanessa froze. Just for 1 second. But that single second was enough for Adrian to understand everything. "Adrian, let me explain. I'm listening." His voice dropped lower. "But this time, I want the truth." Vanessa began glancing around in panic. Guests were now paying attention to them. Whispers spread rapidly across the ballroom. The cameras from the media tables were still pointed toward the stage. Phones were slowly being raised once again. Vanessa forced a smile. "Not now. This is our wedding." Adrian stared at her for a very long time. His eyes no longer looked the same. There was no love left. No gentleness. Only disappointment. Then he quietly said, "No. This is the place where you just denied your own father in front of hundreds of people." Vanessa's face turned ghostly pale. "Don't say that." Adrian unfolded the prison document in front of her. "What is this date?" Vanessa looked down. Her lips shook violently. "That was a long time ago." "A long time ago?" Adrian let out a cold, bitter laugh. The kind with no joy in it at all. "You told me your parents died in an accident." Vanessa stepped backward. I didn't want to talk about the past. Or did you not want anyone discovering that past?" The question struck Vanessa like a knife through the heart. And in that moment, Adrian finally saw who she truly was. Not the perfect bride. Not the elegant businesswoman he thought he loved. But a woman so terrified of poverty that she was willing to erase her own father from her life. Outside, the rain continued crashing violently against the glass windows. Adrian slowly read the words on the prison document. Elijah Cole. Vehicular manslaughter. Then he lifted his eyes. But he wasn't the one driving. His voice turned cold. Was he? Vanessa said nothing. Her eyes filled with tears, whether from shame, anger, or fear tightening around her throat. Even she no longer knew. Adrian stepped closer. "It was you." Vanessa's entire body froze. And from that reaction alone, Adrian received his answer. The atmosphere around them turned ice cold. An older guest in the distance frowned deeply. One of the bridesmaids covered her mouth in shock. In the front row, Margaret Blake, Adrian's mother, slowly rose to her feet. "Adrian, what is happening?" But Adrian never turned around. His eyes remained fixed on Vanessa. "I was about to marry a woman I thought I understood completely." His voice became hoarse. "But it turns out I never knew who she really was. Vanessa burst into tears. I did it because I had no other choice. Adrian stared at her for a long time. No other choice. He repeated the words slowly. Or did you choose to let your father take the blame for you? Vanessa shook her head desperately. I was only 16. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. And what about the 15 years after that? Adrian's voice was quiet, but every word fell like stone. 15 years later, were you still that same 16-year-old girl? You couldn't visit him once? You couldn't write a single letter? You couldn't even say thank you? Vanessa sobbed uncontrollably. But this time, no one rushed to pity her anymore. Because outside, an old father was still standing alone in the rain. That father had lost his freedom, lost his youth, lost his entire life. And on the very day his daughter wore her wedding dress, she still called him a stranger. Adrian lowered his eyes to the wedding ring on his finger. It sparkled beneath the crystal lights. A few minutes ago, it symbolized the future. But now, it felt heavy like a warning. Slowly, he turned toward the entrance. Elijah. The entire ballroom fell silent. The old father outside slowly lifted his head. Adrian stepped down from the stage. Each slow footstep echoed throughout the grand hall. Vanessa panicked and grabbed his arm. Adrian, don't do this. Don't ruin everything. Adrian stopped walking. Then he turned to face her. His eyes were so cold that Vanessa instinctively let go. No, Vanessa. His voice was low and razor sharp. You ruined everything. The moment you called your father a disgrace. Then Adrian walked straight out into the rain. Before the stunned eyes of hundreds of guests, the most powerful groom of the night walked toward the poorest man in the room. Elijah immediately stepped back in confusion. Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Adrian looked at him for a very long time. At the red, tear-filled eyes, at the old trembling hands holding the crushed flowers, at a man so broken by life that even while being humiliated, he still believed he was the one at fault. Then Adrian lowered his head. No, sir. His voice cracked. The person who should apologize is not you. Elijah froze in shock. Inside the ballroom, every guest stood speechless. Vanessa remained frozen at the entrance. And for the first time in 15 years, she realized the secret she had desperately tried to bury was no longer hidden in the darkness. There are lies that people believe if they hide long enough. One day, they will somehow become the truth. There are secrets buried so deeply that even the people involved begin believing the past is truly dead and gone. But the truth is different. The truth is like a crack beneath a sheet of glass. At first, it is tiny, so small that nobody notices. But all it takes is one moment, one impact, or one final drop of water, and the entire glass shatters. And once the truth steps into the light, no luxurious wedding gown, no elegant smile can hide it anymore. That night, inside the most extravagant wedding ballroom in Lagos, Adrian Blake slowly stepped onto the stage. The sound of his shoes echoed across the cold marble floor. Each step, heavy, slow, the violins had stopped. No one even noticed when the orchestra fell silent. The laughter disappeared too. Champagne glasses frozen in midair were slowly lowered. Inside the massive ballroom, the only sounds remaining were the rain crashing against the towering glass windows and the tense breathing of hundreds of guests. Vanessa stood below the stage, her pure white wedding gown still wrapped perfectly around her flawless figure. The diamonds around her neck still sparkled beneath the golden chandeliers. Her makeup remained untouched and beautiful. From a distance, she still looked like the perfect bride of Lagos. But anyone paying close attention could see the panic slowly consuming her. Her lips trembled slightly. Her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Adrian, she whispered softly. Her voice no longer carried the confidence it once had. What are you doing? But Adrian did not look at her. He walked to the center of the stage, picked up the microphone. His hand gripped it so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. For months, he had believed Vanessa was the love of his life. He believed she was a strong woman, a woman who lost her parents young but fought her way upward alone, a woman who entered high society through talent and determination. He had proudly introduced her to his friends, defended her against cruel rumors within Lagos business circles, believed tonight's wedding would mark the beginning of a happy family. But now, the woman standing before him no longer resembled the person he once loved. In Adrian's eyes, Vanessa was no longer the elegant woman he used to hold in his arms. She was someone who denied the father who sacrificed his entire life for her. Adrian slowly turned toward the entrance. Outside, Elijah still stood beneath the awning. The cold rain continued pouring behind him. His faded clothes were soaked. The small bouquet in his hands was nearly destroyed. His thin shoulders trembled from cold and humiliation. But he still refused to leave. He simply stood there, quietly staring into the ballroom. Like a father who only wanted to see his daughter one last time. He did not dare step inside, even though it was his own daughter's wedding, even though, if anyone truly belonged in that ballroom more than anyone else, it was him. Adrian took a deep breath. Then he spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, his deep voice echoed throughout the ballroom. Not loud, but enough to make everyone hold their breath. This wedding ceremony will stop here. The entire room erupted into shocked whispers. Several guests immediately stood up. Chairs scraped loudly across the floor. Adrian's mother, Margaret Blake, rose to her feet. Adrian, what is going on? Several businessmen frowned in confusion. Vanessa's bridesmaids looked at one another in panic. Vanessa turned pale. No, Adrian, don't do this. But Adrian continued. He turned toward the entrance again, the man who was just thrown out of this ballroom. He paused for several seconds. The room became completely silent. Is not a beggar looking for money. The atmosphere froze. Adrian slowly turned toward Vanessa. There was no loud anger left in his eyes anymore. Only cold disappointment, pain, heartbreak. He is the bride's biological father. A massive wave of shock exploded across the ballroom. What? Her father? Didn't she say her parents were dead? Phones were immediately raised once again. But this time, nobody was laughing anymore. Vanessa stumbled backward, trembling. No, that's not true. Adrian lifted the old photograph high into the air. The crystal chandeliers illuminated the faded image. Inside the picture, a tiny little Vanessa smiled brightly inside Elijah's arms. That smile was innocent, pure, filled with happiness. No fame, no wealth, no lies. Only the love of a poor father for his daughter. Adrian stared at the photograph for a long moment. Then he continued speaking. This photo was inside his wallet, and on the back of this photograph, there is a message. His voice tightened as he read aloud. Even if the whole world abandons you, your father will always protect you. Nobody said another word. Several older guests lowered their heads. Some of the people who had laughed at Elijah earlier could no longer bring themselves to look toward the entrance. Adrian pulled out the old prison document. And this, he raised it higher, is Elijah Cole's prison record. Vanessa burst into tears. Adrian, please. But now, her voice no longer carried authority. No power, no pride, no image of the successful businesswoman everyone admired. Only the desperation of someone realizing everything she spent years hiding was collapsing. Adrian looked directly into her eyes. 15 years ago, a fatal accident happened in Lagos. The man who took the blame was Elijah Cole. But the person driving that car? He paused. The entire ballroom held its breath. Was not him. Vanessa covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears began ruining her flawless makeup. Adrian slowly spoke each word. The driver was Vanessa. A wave of horror spread throughout the ballroom. Adrian's mother collapsed back into her chair. His father closed his eyes in disbelief. An older woman whispered softly, "Oh my God. He went to prison for his own daughter?" Adrian nodded. Yes. He turned toward Elijah, standing outside. That man gave up his freedom to save his daughter. He lost his youth, his dignity, his entire life. Adrian's voice began trembling. And she, he looked at Vanessa. She changed her name, entered elite schools, became part of high society, and told everyone her parents were dead. The ballroom felt suffocating. Vanessa shook her head desperately. I was scared. I was too young. Adrian stared at her for a long time. You were 16. Then he stepped down one stair. But what about after that, Vanessa? At 17, you could have written him a letter. At 18, you could have visited him once. At 20, you could have thanked him. His voice cracked painfully. Tonight, You could have at least allowed him to stand quietly in a corner and watch you wear your wedding dress. But instead, you called him a disgrace. Vanessa broke down sobbing. I just didn't want to lose everything. Adrian laughed bitterly, a hollow laugh filled with sadness. Everything? He slowly looked around the golden ballroom. These crystal chandeliers are everything? This powerful guest list is everything? This wedding dress is everything? Then he pointed toward Elijah. No, Vanessa. The man standing out there was everything you ever truly had. The ballroom fell silent. The security guard who shoved Elijah lowered his head in shame. Several guests quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Adrian lowered the microphone slightly. His voice softened. We judge poor people by the clothes they wear, by their rough hands, by the way they speak. He looked toward the guests who mocked Elijah earlier. But sometimes, the poorest person in the room has the richest heart. And sometimes, the person wearing the most expensive suit is the emptiest of all. No one could argue. Vanessa collapsed onto the cold marble floor. Her white wedding gown spread behind her like a shattered cloud. Dad. Her voice was barely audible, but Elijah heard it. His entire body trembled. For 15 years, he had dreamed of hearing that word again. But now that it finally came, it no longer sounded the same. No innocence, no joy, only guilt, tears, and regret that arrived far too late. Vanessa crawled toward the entrance. Dad, I'm sorry. Elijah looked at his daughter. His red, tear-filled eyes were full of pain. He did not walk toward her immediately, not because he stopped loving her, but because some wounds, even after an apology, cannot heal instantly. Adrian stepped down from the stage. He walked toward Elijah. Then, before hundreds of stunned guests, he bowed deeply. Mr. Elijah, his voice cracked. Please forgive us. Not only Vanessa, but everyone in this room who looked down on you. Elijah stepped backward awkwardly. No, sir, I'm just... But Adrian interrupted him. You are the bride's father. And tonight, you deserve to enter this ballroom through the front door. Those words made several guests burst into tears. Adrian turned toward the guards. Open the doors. The massive doors slowly opened wider. Cold wind and rain swept into the ballroom. But this time, Elijah was no longer being thrown out. He was being welcomed inside. Every step he took was slow, heavy, soaked with rain. But the entire ballroom rose to their feet. No one laughed anymore. They stood silently, watching the father who sacrificed everything for his daughter. Vanessa remained kneeling on the marble floor. When Elijah approached, she bent down completely before him. Dad, I was wrong. I was ashamed of being poor. I was ashamed of the past. Her tears continued falling onto the cold floor. But the person who should be ashamed is me. Elijah looked at his daughter for a long time. His old trembling hands slowly lifted. He wanted to touch her head, the way he used to when she was little. But his hand stopped in midair. Vanessa. His voice was rough with emotion. I never needed you to become rich. I never needed you to become a lady of high society. His throat tightened. I only hoped you would never lose your heart. Those words shattered Vanessa completely. Beside them, Adrian slowly removed the wedding ring from his finger. The soft sound of the ring touching the silver tray was almost silent. But to Vanessa, it sounded like the end of the entire life she had spent years building. Adrian, she looked up desperately. Please, don't leave me. Adrian looked at her. There was no hatred left in his eyes, only deep sadness. I cannot marry a woman who left her father standing in the rain like a stranger. I cannot build a family with someone who sees love and family as things that can be discarded the moment they become embarrassing. Vanessa covered her face and sobbed uncontrollably. The cameras continued recording everything. But now, she no longer cared about her reputation. Because finally, she understood something. A reputation can be rebuilt. Money can be earned again. A wedding can happen another day. But a father who has spent 15 years carrying heartbreak cannot be healed with only a few tears. Elijah slowly turned to leave. Vanessa immediately grabbed his sleeve. Dad, please don't go. Elijah stopped. He looked down at his daughter's trembling hand, holding onto him. Then he quietly said, I'm not leaving because I hate you. Vanessa lifted her tear-filled eyes. Then why? Elijah swallowed painfully. Because I no longer know if there's still a place for me in your life. Those words, pierced straight through Vanessa's heart. She once had a father willing to go to prison for her, but she herself had turned him into a stranger. And tonight, before hundreds of guests, before the man she was supposed to marry, before the glamorous city of Lagos itself, the truth was finally exposed. Elijah was never Vanessa's shame. Vanessa's ingratitude was the greatest disgrace of that wedding night. There are apologies that come far too late. Not because the person hearing them has stopped loving, not because their heart has turned cold, but because some wounds last silently for so long that people no longer know how to find their way back to each other. That night, after Adrian's wedding ring was placed onto the cold silver tray, the most luxurious wedding hall in Lagos fell into a silence heavier than anyone had ever felt before. No one lifted champagne glasses anymore. There was no laughter, no fake congratulations beneath the crystal chandeliers. It felt as though everyone had just awakened from a beautiful dream, only to realize that beneath all the glittering lights was a heartbreaking truth too painful to bear. Hundreds of guests stood frozen. No one dared look directly at Elijah Cole, the old man standing in the middle of the ballroom with rain-soaked clothes clinging to his body. Just minutes earlier, they had called him a beggar, mocked him, looked at him as though he were filth, ruining their elegant celebration. That man had been shoved onto the cold marble floor like something worthless. But now, he was the very reason the entire room lowered their heads in shame. Vanessa knelt at her father's feet, her pure white wedding gown spread across the polished marble floor. But now, it no longer looked like a symbol of happiness. It looked more like a funeral cloth, covering the fake dream she had spent 15 years building through denial and silence. "Dad," Vanessa's voice shattered through tears. "Please, don't leave." Elijah looked down at his daughter. His eyes were red with sorrow. For 15 years, he had imagined this moment countless times. There were nights sleeping beneath bridges, when he closed his eyes and thought, if one day Vanessa calls me dad again, I'll hold her tightly. He had imagined telling her that he never blamed her, that every pain he endured had been worth it, that as long as his daughter was alive and well, he could accept anything. But now, when that word dad finally reached his ears, Elijah could not step forward, because he understood it was no longer the innocent voice of the little girl he once knew. It was the cry of someone who had just lost everything and was desperately reaching for the last person who might still forgive her. Elijah gently removed Vanessa's hands from his sleeve, not harshly, not coldly, just slowly, as if every finger slipping away from him was another memory falling apart. "Vanessa," he whispered softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I waited for you for 15 years. The ballroom fell completely silent. No one dared breathe too loudly. Elijah looked into his daughter's tear-filled eyes. "I waited for a letter. I waited for one visit. I waited for you to ask whether I was still alive." Vanessa's tears continued falling onto the cold marble floor. Elijah swallowed painfully. His thin shoulders trembled slightly. "But tonight, when I came only to see you wearing your wedding dress." He paused for several seconds. "You looked at me like I was dirt." Vanessa broke down sobbing. Her cries echoed through the enormous ballroom. "I was wrong. I was truly wrong." Elijah nodded gently. "I know. No anger. No bitterness." And somehow, that calmness hurt the people in the ballroom far more than any scream ever could. Then Elijah slowly turned toward Adrian. The young groom still stood silently nearby. His eyes were red with heartbreak and disappointment. Elijah looked at him for a long moment, then softly said, "You are a good man. Don't let your heart become chained to a lie." Adrian lowered his head. For the first time that night, the powerful man of Lagos high society could no longer maintain his composure. "Sir, I'm sorry." Elijah shook his head. "You did nothing wrong." He spoke gently. "The person suffering most in this story is not me." Then Elijah turned away. He began walking toward the ballroom doors. Vanessa panicked and jumped to her feet. "Dad!" She ran after him. But Elijah did not stop. The massive doors opened. Cold Lagos rain immediately swept into the ballroom. A strong gust of wind lifted Vanessa's wedding veil into the air. The candles on the banquet tables flickered before dying out. Elijah stepped outside. Alone. No luxury car. No bodyguards. No umbrella. Only the thin silhouette of a father who loved his daughter enough to lose his entire life for her. Vanessa ran after him. Rain slammed against her face, ruined her expensive mascara, soaked her wedding gown until it became unbearably heavy. She nearly slipped on the hotel steps. "Dad, Dad, please." But the street outside had already disappeared beneath the white curtain of rain. Elijah was gone. Only the small bouquet remained, lying silently on the cold stone steps. The bouquet he carried the entire journey, just to give to his daughter on her wedding day. The white petals were crushed, the old ribbon stained with mud. Vanessa trembled as she picked up the bouquet, and the moment her fingers touched it, every memory came rushing back. She remembered her first day of school. Her father wore a faded shirt with a worn collar. He held her hand as they walked along the red dirt roads of Makoko. Back then, Vanessa had felt ashamed of her father's torn sandals. But Elijah simply smiled, a gentle smile. "Study hard, my daughter. One day, you'll walk into places your father never even dreamed of." Vanessa remembered the nights without electricity. Their tiny house was unbearably hot. Her father sat awake all night fanning her while she slept. While he stayed awake suffering through heat and mosquitoes until morning, she remembered poor meals with only one small piece of fish. Her father always claimed he had already eaten, but one night, she woke up and saw him quietly drinking water to ease his hunger. She remembered his hands, those rough, calloused hands, always smelling of engine oil, seawater, and sweat. The hands that held her whenever she was afraid of thunder. The hands that wiped away her tears. The hands that pulled her out of the darkness of poverty. And those same hands had willingly accepted handcuffs in her place on that terrible night when she was 16. Vanessa clutched the bouquet tightly against her chest, then collapsed to her knees beneath the rain. Her cries mixed with the thunder above Lagos. There was no proud bride anymore. No elegant woman of high society. No woman desperately trying to escape her poor past. Only a daughter who had finally realized the person who loved her most in the world was also the person she had hurt the deepest. Inside the ballroom, hundreds of guests stood silently behind the giant glass windows. No one spoke. The people who once laughed at Elijah now lowered their heads in shame. The security guard who pushed him to the floor quietly removed his earpiece. His eyes were red with guilt. An older guest whispered softly, "We were wrong." Adrian stood at the doorway. He watched Vanessa kneeling in the rain, but he did not walk over to help her up. Not because he was cruel, but because he understood there are lessons people only understand after they themselves collapse. At the far end of the street, Elijah quietly walked through the white curtain of rain. He never looked back. Not because he stopped loving his daughter, but because he knew if he turned around, his heart would soften once again. And perhaps he would forgive too quickly. Forgive 15 years of silence. Forgive the shame in his daughter's eyes. Forgive being called a disgrace on the very day he should have felt proudest. Elijah stopped beneath a small awning. He placed a hand over his chest. Inside his torn coat was still a carefully folded old letter. A letter he wrote many years ago, but never sent. "Vanessa, if one day you are truly happy, your father won't need to appear in your life anymore. I only hope you become a good person." Elijah stared at the words for a long time, then folded the letter again and slipped it back into his pocket. His tears fell quietly, mixing with the rain. "You must learn how to live with kindness, my daughter," he whispered through tears, "even if your father is no longer beside you." That night, the grandest wedding in Lagos did not end with vows. It ended with a soaked wedding gown, a wedding ring removed, a crushed bouquet, and the lonely silhouette of an old father disappearing into the rain. The next morning, every newspaper in Lagos published the scandal involving Vanessa Blake. But the image people could not stop thinking about was not the old accident, not the canceled wedding, not the collapse of her reputation. It was the image of a poor father standing in the rain, begging only for the chance to see his daughter in her wedding dress, before being rejected by the very child he sacrificed everything for. Vanessa lost Adrian, lost her place in high society, lost the fake admiration people once gave her. But the most painful thing was that she no longer knew where to find her father. She searched the old streets of Lagos, returned to Makoko, went to the docks where Elijah once worked, even searched the prison where he spent years behind bars. But everywhere she went, people only shook their heads. Elijah Cole had left Lagos. No one knew where he went. Some said he boarded an old bus toward the countryside. Others believed he traveled to a distant coastal town. Some whispered that he simply wanted to spend the rest of his life somewhere nobody knew his name. Vanessa stood before the old wooden house where she once grew up. The house she once hated because it was too poor. But now, it was the only place that still held the purest love she had ever known. She knelt before the rotting doorway, placed a fresh bouquet upon the doorstep, then broke down crying. "Dad, I'm sorry." But this time, no one came outside to hold her anymore. No rough hands wiped away her tears. No gentle voice whispered, "It's okay, my daughter." Only the sound of wind moving through the old roof remained. And silence. A silence more painful than any punishment. Because in this life, poverty does not make people worthless. Old clothes do not take away a father's dignity. But ingratitude can turn a child into the poorest soul in the world. Some people spend their entire lives trying to escape a poor past. They change their names, their clothes, their voices, even the people who once loved them. But they forget one thing. A person can escape poverty with money, but they can never escape emptiness. Once they have lost their heart, and ever since that rainy night, Vanessa finally understood. The greatest price of shame was not losing a wedding, not losing fame, not losing the wealthy man she once wanted to marry. It was the moment she called the father who sacrificed his entire life for her a disgrace, because at that exact moment, she lost the most precious thing a human being could ever have in this world: unconditional love.